the last section of the chapter 7 presentation, and it's going to cover Byzantine art. So right off the bat, I have a title slide here that shows you how very, very different Byzantine art is from what we've been seeing. And you will learn more about that very soon. So here's a map of the late Byzantine and Roman world. So after Rome was divided into two halves here, the Western Empire, and you can see it's been shrinking now. So this was what is known as the fall of the Roman Empire, where all of the provinces were taken over by pagans. The Roman army retreated. I don't know, it's very complicated. But the eastern half of the empire remained intact, so it's really big, and the western half not so big anymore. So Constantine moved his capital over here to Constantinople, and the old name of this city was Byzantium, and he changed it to Constantinople, but the name of the art style and the period is Byzantine, and that's where the name comes from. There are many things about the art and religion of the eastern part of the empire that are different, but you only need to concern yourself with the Byzantine look. So first of all, we have an emperor, Justinian. So the Western Roman Empire fell in 476, but the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire flourished at its capital, Constantinople. Justinian became emperor in 527, so we're really jumping ahead to look at the age of Justinian, the golden age of Justinian. So he's known by historians for doing a lot of really, really great things. We're just going to look at some of his great things. He's a pretty interesting guy, actually. I can't believe nobody's made a movie about him. Anyway, this is one of the things that he's most famous for, and this is rebuilding of Hagia Sophia. So Hagia Sophia just means holy wisdom of God. And we know the names of the designers of the building, Anthemius and Isidorus. They integrated here two types of architecture in a huge structure. Let me move forward and show you the building. This is closer to what Justinian would have had built, because those minarets, those towers, were added much later. So we're just going to block them out for right now. So the designers integrated two types of architecture in the huge structure. They consolidated a basilica and a central plan, also known as a martyrium, into one indivisible whole. And here you can see by looking at it, it doesn't really look like a basilica at all. In fact, it's hard to distinguish what the actual building is because there's so many things around it. Like, are all of these little pieces, are they all part of the building? It's confusing. What we can tell is that there's a very large dome up there. So here's a cutaway and a plan showing what we're looking at. There's the dome on top. And here's the plan, and so you can see, use your imagination. This is the nave-ish part of the building. It says that there. And this is the central plan, the center right under the dome. There are side aisles, which really don't look much like side aisles at all. There's a nice forecourt or narthex here, which is the entry section, and a sanctuary apse over here where the high altar would be. The gallery, so there's an upstairs. So in the Byzantine church, there was a lot of liturgy, a very elaborate liturgy, which means sort of the various ceremonial parts of the worship service, which include processions and prayers and readings and things. And it was very elaborate. It took, I think, at least 2 hours. And there were processions around the center of this. The congregation, people like you and I, would not be in the center. This was only for the priests and all the people who were processing. but the congregants, the worshippers, would gather in the side aisles. They were segregated by gender, so the men would be on the ground floor down here, and the women would be up in the gallery. I think they're still segregated by gender. So here's a view of the inside, and now you can sort of get an idea of why it's an important building and why we talk about it, because it's a huge space, a huge indoor covered space with this amazingly engineered dome up here. Later on in history, it was converted into a mosque, and so there was a lot of change to the decoration, including the addition of these roundels with Arabic writing in them. So just kind of ignore those too. So the Byzantine liturgy required that the gospel book and the host, which is the consecrated bread and wine, would always be in or near the sanctuary. There was a vertical rather than a long axis to this sanctuary, meaning that in the Byzantine mind, the axis or the point of orientation of the building was vertical. It went from the human occupied space up through the dome into heaven. The artwork in Byzantine art is more symbolic, so it's rather than narrative. So most of it is now lost. Most of the art that was in Hagia Sophia was destroyed, and I'll get to that later. But the worship is also contemplative rather than active, contemplative for the worshiper. The dome represents the canopy of heaven. It has a diameter of 108 feet with 40 windows around it to create the illusion of it floating up above the nave. The longitudinal nave has two conches and exedra. So these are the conch shells or the half domes and the exedra. Don't worry too much about that. It's only if you're an architecture major you would want to go deeper in this, and you probably will in an architectural history class. I just want you to see this and accept this as sort of an incredibly elaborate, large Byzantine church. So the upward pull is obvious, and it comes from the Neoplatonic theory of meditating to rise from the material world to the spiritual. So that's sort of the gist of what the contemplative practice was, that they would meditate and feel as though they are being transported into a spiritual realm. Also, the emperor participated in worship, so he was part of the processions that would march around here with incense. You have to imagine what this was like. So that's Hagia Sophia. And then Justinian also regained or recaptured part of Italy, because Ravenna had come under the control of Goths after the piece that I already showed you, the Oratory of Galla Placidia. That after that was made, Goths took over Ravenna, and so there was a period where they were not really part of the Roman Empire, and then Justinian retook it. And after Justinian took it, then he did some building. He didn't personally go there, but he had some building done and changed some of the designs and some of the Gothic structures as well. And when I say Gothic here, I don't mean the later medieval style, but Goth as in barbarians. But they were not pagans. They were actual Arian Christians, which is a whole different subject that we don't have time to go into that. So this church is one that Justinian had built in Ravenna, and it's called San Vitale, and it was dedicated to a local martyr who was named, San Vitale. It's octagonal. You can see the plan and the drawing here. So it's a central plan church, but the opening is not a focal point. It is open. So worshippers would gather in the ambulatory and possibly in the central dome area. I'm not really sure how it functioned. But you can see that the center part is raised with clear story windows, and there's arcade around this. So in a lot of ways, it resembles the building of Santa Costanza in Rome. So let's look at this. Yeah, there's Santa Costanza with my comparison across the board. I think they're very, very similar. These two drawings, they don't look that similar, but trust me, they are very similar. So here's a view on the inside. So there is like an apse here. So we've got this round space in the center, and then there's an arm off of it in one place with some very significant mosaics. And these are the only ones we're going to zoom in on and look at. So this is the altar of the church, and this is the apse. So this is the focal point of worship. Up above this is this half dome that we're going to look at the mosaics there. I want you to see their location. And then we'll look at this little lower mosaic down here and the one exactly opposite it. So this is Justinian, and facing it is his wife Theodora. So two large mosaic panels at Ravenna portray Justinian and Theodora. The rulers present precious offerings to Christ in controlled, overlapped stones, creating three-dimensionality, sort of. Objects symbolize the Eucharist, which is a ceremony in which followers eat and drink bread and wine in emblematic remembrance of Christ. So here's the Justinian one, which was placed on the right hand of the mosaic of Christ in the center of the apse. And Justinian here is represented in the center in sort of the same style as Theodosius in that Mizoram that I showed you. So there's Justinian in the old language of the emperor with a halo around his head. He's not saying here he's a god. It's just kind of like old habits die really hard. But there he is presenting a dish to Jesus. So Jesus, the mosaic of Jesus is over on this side. So people are sort of focused that way. Over on this side, we've got some soldiers with a shield, interestingly enough, with the Cairo, which would remind viewers of the story of Constantine and the Battle of the Milvian Bridge when his soldiers gained their victory under that sign. And then over here are priests. So this is Byzantine representative mode. This is our first real look at it. And the most typical of Byzantine mosaics is to have a gold background, especially if you are representing something that does not take place on earth. And this always represents sort of a supernatural event happening. And in this case, Justinian is imagining that he's presenting this to Jesus. So, of course, that's going to happen in heaven. There are many other signs that the representation of the here and now don't matter. It's not a literal physical space. So, for example, look at the feet of all these men in these cute little shoes. They're overlapping in some sort of random way that it doesn't matter. They don't have to figure in space. They didn't really occur in the physical space. And then you get the fact that underneath those people, there's no illusion of shading. There's no modeling or very little modeling on the mosaics of faces. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what people look like. It doesn't matter that you give the illusion of reality. What matters is that you are representing an event in symbolic mode. Facing him is his wife, and so we get another really strong indication that the rules of space and gravity don't matter, and that is this bizarre little fountain that seems to be tipping over. The base is on a different plane. It's so strange. But you get used to it. This is Byzantine art, and her attendants, they're all females on this side. These guys are males, but these are all a group of women, and they have gold background in the mosaic, and Theodora is depicted as a queen with a very elaborate headdress and a halo again. She's also carrying a very large golden chalice that she is bringing to Jesus. And this man is pulling back the curtain in the direction of Jesus. So Jesus would be over here, up higher. I will show you again what it looks like. So here's the Jesus that Justinian and Theodora are bringing their gifts to. And he's similar and yet different to some of the Jesuses we've seen. He's young, he's beardless, he has short hair. He's wearing a long purple robe trimmed with gold. So it's kind of the reverse of the one out in the Galla Placidia, which, by the way, is out in the yard of this church. They're just a very short walk away. So, of course, the artist who put this in would have seen that other Jesus with the sheep. And some vitale, Jesus here sitting on the sphere of the heavens. 4 rivers are flowing out. The depiction of rocks and everything gets very Byzantine, very symbolic. The clouds up here look like strange fish floating in the sky. Here's St. Ecclesias holding a model of this church. I believe this is San Vitale over here, the guy that the church is named for. He was martyred. So there's Jesus. Jesus is extending a wreath. This is a martyr's crown. He's giving this to San Vitale to indicate you earned a place in heaven by giving your life. And here is my sort of recreation of the arrangement. So there's the Jesus I just showed you. On Jesus's right side is Justinian. On Jesus's left side is Theodora. So great stuff. Beautiful mosaics. The entire interior of this church was covered with these rich mosaics, and a lot of stories are illustrated. This is the only one we're looking at, but it's really, really typical of Byzantine churches to be encrusted with mosaics dominated by gold. Now, I just have one brief slide to show you here, and I feel kind of bad about including it because I don't know, it was in the chapter, so I'm showing it to you. It's the only manuscript you're going to see for now, but you'll get plenty of manuscripts later. So, illuminated manuscripts. Another art form that comes from the Middle Ages is the illuminated manuscript. So books for religious services, personal study, or expression of prestige were richly decorated. Manuscript, just that term, indicates that a book was written by hand. This will be a quiz term. Parchment is the most common material. It is animal skin that has been cleaned and stretched thin to dry. If they were illustrated, they are called illuminated. Monasteries, convents, and workshops all created illuminated manuscripts. And I will show you many, many, many later. But you get one for right now. So this illuminated manuscript is from a codex. A codex is a book that is bound along one edge, so you can just turn pages, just like books. It was a new thing, though. Before codexes, everything was a scroll. So you can see the advantage of codex. This one was written in Greek on purple vellum, which means that the animal skin was dyed to be that reddish, purplish color. And that was significant due to the cost of dye that was usually restricted to imperial use. This illustrates the story of Rebecca, and it appears with figures that are full-bodied and lifelike. So there are some very interesting manuscripts that come from the Byzantine period. We're just not going to go much deeper into that right now. So let's talk about icons and iconoclasm. Images of saints, Mary, and Christ were painted on the walls of churches or panels and known as icons. These were central to the religious practices of the Byzantine Church. Church doctrine distinguished the veneration of icons as not being idolatry if a holy idea or person was depicted. So people would use these for prayer. Iconoclasm literally means image breaking, a process by which visual art is destroyed. And this is our first look at iconoclasm this semester, but it will not be our last. It's kind of a theme that we will revisit because it remains current and it pops up at different times in history. So I sort of want this to be an overarching theme for this course, is for you to realize when iconoclasm occurred and under what conditions and why. So during the 8th century and again in 813, many Christian icons were destroyed. It's because church leaders feared that they could lead to idolatry or distraction from pure worship. Attacking icons was also thought to check the growing power of the monks in the monasteries. I'm not sure I get that, but there it is. So here's our earliest surviving icon. So this survives because it was in a church way off in Egypt, up on Mount Sinai, and it just kind of didn't get found and wasn't destroyed there. So a surviving early icon of the Virgin and Child with saints and angels portrays Mary as the go-between for her divine Son on behalf of worshipers. She is portrayed as an imperial throne for the baby Jesus. So baby Jesus sits on her lap, her body becomes his throne. The holy figures are illusionistic and more lifelike, while warrior saints are more stylized. So by holy figures, it means these like angels back here, which are shaded. This is paint. This is not mosaic. So these were used heavily in the early Byzantine church, and then they were destroyed, and then they were used again, and they are still used today in the Orthodox churches, which the Byzantine church has evolved into Eastern Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, and Russian Orthodox churches, and they all utilize icons. So icons were used like this. People would pray through the image, locking their eyes on the open eyes of one of the figures who is staring at them. Mary's not looking at us, and neither is baby Jesus. So you cannot pray to them. You must pray to one of these two men on either side. And your eyes are open, and you pray, and you envision that you are communicating with that saint who is up in heaven. And your message will get delivered via the icon, almost like it's a phone or a relay service. And your message then will go to that saint, who will then communicate your message to the Virgin Mary or to baby Jesus. So that's how icons work, and they still work today. So because of this, the very image of the icon has sort of an aura of almost like a magical power. And to this very day, icons are copied from each other, and the copies keep getting copied and coming down. There's something that they believe is very sacred about those images. I'm not going to go too deeply into that. Middle Byzantine art. This dates from 843. This is after they said, hey, we can use icons. We don't have to be careful as long as we're, and we do have to be careful, but we're not going to worship the object. We're going to always send our prayers through to the actual deities. So two churches of the monastery of Hosios Lucas are surviving examples of the architecture. Let's just look at them because they're not on your list. You don't need to know this, but I showed you some vitale, and I said that it is the Byzantine style to encrust the interiors of churches with mosaics that are largely dominated by gold. And here you can see this. This is the plan of the monasteries. You can see several different church structures here. And over here some more, and just domes over the center. Dome here. There's a dome there. Here's the dome. So you can see this is sort of the structure that is very common in this Middle Byzantine art in the golden mosaics. The Venetian church of St. Mark held relics of the city's martyr patron saint, which was Mark. He was one of the disciples. The church is a Greek cross plan, meaning that the arms are of equal length. It had 5 square units, so I hope you can see these here on this plan, and a dome over each. And the dome was on, don't worry about the vocabulary. So here's the exterior, the facade of St. Mark's in Venice, and it's on the Piazza San Marco, which is famous for being full of tourists and pigeons. And this is the extremely ornate facade. You can see the domes back behind and some sculptures on the exterior. And just a note of interest, right here on the facade, on this corner of the building, are those tetrarchs that we saw in late Rome. So they're stuck there on the facade, just out in the weather. Anybody can walk up to them. Nobody's guarding them. It's crazy. This is the interior of San Marco. So it's really huge. It's totally enormous. The 5 domes, you can kind of get a sense. You can see barrel vaulting in domes and rings of clerestory windows up in the domes. So Byzantine churches used a specific program for their mosaics. There was and there is a hierarchy of images from the top to the bottom. At the very, very top, the highest point in a Byzantine church, you must have either Jesus as ruler of all, or a depiction of Pentecost, which was the day when, after the resurrection of Jesus, after his ascension, that the Holy Spirit came down on all the believers and as tongues of fire. So sometimes that's depicted. I don't have any examples of that. We're just going to focus on Jesus up there. Then under that is Virgin Mary and angels, holy, holy personages. Then under that, images of Christ on earth, like Christ in his ministry, teaching, preaching, healing, whatever he did during his lifetime. Mosaics of that, representations of that would be lower. Then the very lowest level, like right down here over doors, etc., you would have the earthly realms where you might depict saints or rulers, other people who are not gods. Okay. So this is the center dome, the highest dome at St. Mark. So it is indeed Christ as ruler of all, Christ Pantocrator. He's sitting on the rainbow up in heaven. These are stars, and he is ruling. Just notice all the gold, tons of gold in there. Of course, it's real gold. Now, speaking of Christ Pantocrator, and since we've been looking at how the images of Jesus have evolved over the years, I wanted to show you one that might cause you a little bit of alarm. When I show my classes this from a Byzantine church, this would be in the highest point. This is Christ Pantocrator. I asked them to imagine how they would feel if they walked into this church, how they would feel about Jesus, how they imagine Jesus feels about them. And I think he looks a little scary, and everybody agrees. He's got a very severe look about him. This is far, far from that gentle shepherd boy that we saw, that guy. So just notice how over the centuries representations of Jesus have changed. And they're all from the imagination. We don't really know what he looked like. So another thing about Byzantine mosaics, like the icons, they were all copied from each other because they think there's something inherently sort of special and sacred about each image. So I found another Christ Pantocrator. This one's not in a dome. This one's in a half dome over an apse. But it's really obvious that both of these were copied from some long ago original because there's too many similarities in them. However, the one on the right obviously is given a softer, gentler look by the artists. We don't have so much dark around the eyes, not those heavy bags, those big black lines under the eyes that we have here. But now I'll show you the similarities. So for example, they each have two little locks of hair in the forehead. We've got these strange lines that appear up here with this little U-shaped thing on the forehead. We have this squared off form on the neck. None of these things really reflect an observed body. It's not like they had a model and they studied it to see what happened. No, they are copying from some two-dimensional image that was made probably as an icon and then copied here and copied here. I also like to point out that the man on the left seems to have a Bible which he is keeping closed, doesn't want you to look at it, but the gentler man on the right has an open Bible. He wants you to read it, and in fact there are legible words in it. So even though they're both copied from the same originally original, they have entirely different feels to them. So later Byzantine art, this goes from 1261 to 1453. The patronage of emperors and courtiers renewed church building and renovation, as seen in the Church of Christ in Cora. This is a harrowing of hell, a popular iconography that occurs in Byzantine art, where Jesus goes down into hell after he has been crucified and buried. Before his resurrection, he visits hell and he frees Old Testament figures who died before he came. So he's, I believe he's freeing Adam and Eve here. I know. The rulers of Russia adopted Orthodox Christianity as early as the 10th century. A work from this time is Three Angels Visiting Abraham, which presents the theme of the Trinity. The Trinity is usually portrayed as three identical divine individuals. This is the Trinity in theological terms is the three aspects of God, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. And it's very difficult to illustrate that, so a lot of people just show it as three angels. And this is a Russian icon of the three angels. And that brings us to the end. So now you've experienced Byzantine art. We will see some effects of this as influence much later when we get to the Italian Renaissance. So I hope you don't just forget the whole thing. So that's it for chapter 7.